Josh Raven here with the Daily Dot at DreamHack Austin, talking to Blue, one of the kind of upcoming casters in the scene, doing some more live events now, and that's what we're going to jump into straight away, because obviously you were casting before for quite a while, mainly online stuff.
Yeah.
Now you're coming back, doing these big live events. How has that transition been for you? Are you finding it more difficult, more challenging, or more enjoyable? Do you think you're kind of more suited to the analyst desk or the casting role? What do you think?
I definitely like the casting a little bit more, but I'm definitely pumped to be at some of these bigger events like Austin and whatnot, and I think I'll be doing at the Pro League Finals next month or next week as well. It's really fun. Like, I love working at events with a crowd because you can just gel with that so much, and you sort of like increase your own hype factor based on that. It's a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to doing more of that stuff in the future.
Do you think when the crowds are kind of more hyped, it kind of helps you get in the zone
Oh,
more?
yeah, absolutely.
Or can it be a little bit distracting, though, at times? Like, if they're chanting in the background, does it throw you off at all, or is it just you just go with the flow?
Maybe a tiny amount, but for the most part, it's actually like really entertaining, and you can sort of bounce off it, especially if they're like showing it on the screen and stuff. It's really awesome to see. And at the North American events, I've actually had quite a bit of it. I was at the major just over a month ago now, and there was a lot of it there too, and it was just awesome.
Well, yeah, you mentioned North American events. We're here at DreamHack Austin. How's the crowd been for you so far? We haven't had much of a chance to get down there, but it sounds like they're pretty loud from where we're
Yeah,
sat.
the Cloud9 game, definitely a little one-sided, but it was pretty cool when Cloud9 almost rounded that comeback on the last map. But obviously pretty disappointing for their fans that they weren't able to make it through there.
Yeah, well, talking about Cloud9, obviously they did get eliminated just now by Tempo Storm, I believe. Not many people thought they would do too well in this tournament, obviously having just brought in Slemmy. Did you have higher hopes for them, or do you think they kind of outdid themselves here?
I think in the semifinals specifically, they outdid themselves. It wasn't too surprising the fact they actually got to the semifinals when you consider the shape that some of the other North American teams have been in. But based on the T-sided performances they had over the past couple of days, I thought that it was going to be a quick 2-0 for Tempo Storm and they would get absolutely decimated. But they took quick control of the first map, and they almost actually rounded the comeback entirely on the second map just to make it a 2-0 sweep. It was just unfortunate that in the third map, for whatever reason, in that first half, they just dropped the ball entirely, and all the individual progress that had been made throughout the first two maps just seemed like it was non-existent all of a sudden, and we just saw all those players just drop the ball completely, and it was not really possible for them to round that large of a comeback within the second half of map number 3.
Yeah, you spoke about their T-sides. We spoke to JDM yesterday after their loss to Cloud9, and he said both teams were struggling with their T-sides. I think JDM put it down to, on CLG's side, simply just getting the frags on the entries was difficult, but for Cloud9 it seemed like they had some sort of unseen strategical issue, which seems surprising with Slemmy. But what do you think about that game yesterday? Do you agree with that sentiment, that it was simply just a fragging issue for CLG and a strategical issue for Cloud9?
It was a number of issues. I think to a certain degree it was a fragging issue for Cloud9 too, but it's definitely a strategical thing when you consider the fact that both in the Luminosity game and in the CLG games that were played on Mirage, Cloud9 had this tendency that whenever they would lose a player initially at the beginning of the round, they would just instantly freeze up directly after that. They would never really attempt to go in for trades and whatnot, so there were so many free kills they were just giving away at the beginning of the rounds when someone would try to play aggressively to find an entry or whatever may have you, and then they would never make up for that, so they would freeze up. They wouldn't ever really try to make up for that, and they would slowly just get picked off one by one by the CTs.
We're going to look back at some of the other teams as well in the tournament. Obviously, CLG, Cloud9, they're kind of your favourites. Liquid playing right now. We can touch on them, I guess, briefly, but they are in game against Luminosity. They have just lost map 1, I believe, as we started this interview. Do you think that they have done as well as they should have done here in this tournament? Because they did have that replacement losing Simple. Sorry, my bad. Do you think they've outdone themselves, is what I meant to say here, after losing Simple, kind of throwing together this roster?
Again, it's basically like this Austin event has essentially, for me personally, gone pretty much as expected. We have the two better performing, at least in recent on the results, North American teams making their way into the semifinals. But ultimately, when we get there, we have both Tempo Storm and Luminosity, two of these Brazilian teams that share a lot of their strats and a lot of the way that they play together. They've just been stomping all over North America recently, and that's not going to be any different here, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, now looking at some of the lesser teams that showed up, teams like Splyce, they really had a cobbled together roster. Even Summit showing up, unfortunately having a little unfortunate incident on train, running through the fire and flames and dying, and Freakazoid playing as well. Do you think Freakazoid kind of showed his worth at this tournament? Because obviously he's just been cut from Cloud9. He's going to be looking around for a new lineup. Do you think that he proved himself his worth in this tournament? And to a more extent, do you think Splyce can be proud of what they did with that lineup?
Yeah, actually, I mean, they were fairly competitive when you consider the fact that this roster sort of got tossed together last minute, and I think the Summit acquisition, or the Summit pickup, I guess you could call it, happened seemingly within the past couple of days of the event. Summit actually decided to go for that. So with everything sort of being scrapped together last moment, the fact that they made their final set versus, I believe it was CLG, as competitive as it was still a pretty great achievement. They almost took that map. If Summit didn't have the incident that now seems to have a spot named after him on a map for. And beyond that as well, Freakazoid, to go back to that point too, Freakazoid actually did a fantastic job on train initially on the T side. His entries were incredibly powerful, and he should have definitely proven the fact that he's still here, he still is hungry, he wants to be joining another better team, hopefully, to be able to rise up to a great spot in North America once again.
Obviously for Splyce, they went to the major. They kind of surprised everyone. They got really good results at the qualifier, made it into the major. Didn't do too well at the tournament, but what could you expect really from them? But now it seems like they're on a little bit of a decline. We spoke to Aria yesterday, and he said they're going to keep the same 5 for the upcoming qualifier for the minor for the next major. Why do you think that they have declined after surprising so many people in the qualifiers for the previous major?
So the qualifiers itself was always a bit of a dream run there when you consider the opponents they actually had to go through. Going through CLG there, that was definitely a pretty big upset for a lot of people at the time. But looking back at it ever since then, I think Miss Harvey said on the desk that they're actually, with the exception of yesterday's match, there had not been a single time where CLG had actually beat Splyce. It was sort of like a little mini kryptonite for those guys. So when you consider that, it was, over the grand scheme of things, it's not too surprising to see them beat them on another LAN environment. But the real victory was them beating over SK. But even SK, as we've seen from some recent events, Sivo being a little bit different, but they've been a fairly inconsistent team, especially online themselves. And they admitted on Twitter that they were fairly disappointed with their run. So Splyce's run, definitely a bit of a dream run there. But I mean, coming back down to earth at the major to sort of get destroyed by Fnatic and the other teams they faced there. And coming off of that too, they lost their coach. And with their seeming to be just overall, like being a North American team that isn't very high up, there can always be a lot of dispute and whatnot that goes on the inside of the team, and that's probably what I see is happening right now, is they're trying to figure themselves out, but it's leading to a lot of debate and whatnot, maybe not even just really working that hard anymore. Well, maybe we'll see them come back a little bit in the North American scale when we do get into that major season once again, but I don't imagine that they'll go to any really high level.
Okay. The other 2 teams the other team I really wanted to mention was Energy. Obviously, they got knocked out by Selfless yesterday, and that seemed like a little bit of a surprise. Selfless, they have been doing pretty well, but Energy you would consider to be perhaps the favourites in that tournament, in that match. Were you surprised at all by Energy's performance here?
Yeah.
They didn't seem to get things rolling at all.
I actually thought Energy would have ended up coming out over Selfless when you consider just how poorly Selfless did last week at the SIVO finals. Selfless really dropped the ball there, but it seems like coming off of that LAN, Selfless really did take some time to sort of recenter themselves and restructure off of the mistakes that they had made back at that SIVO LAN to come in and really try to get as far as possible here. And while they didn't end up making it past Liquid, they do still end up beating Energy, which is another team that has Gabi at the helm of it, and he's been doing wonders with 2 players you would normally never expect to be playing at this high of a tier in North America, with Justin and Silent on the roster, 2 players that have like barely ever existed in high tier North American Counter-Strike as of late. So he's done a great job bringing that team up, but ultimately I think Selfless just prepared way more for this event, and they were the better team in that outcome.
Yep. Okay. Talking about then overall this tournament so far, what would you say that we have learned, if anything? Because so far it seems like Brazilians, they're going to win again.
Yeah.
North, and in terms of the NA standings, we just have no real clue about where teams stand. Have we learned anything?
For the time being, it still seems like it's the same old story for North America, that they still have a whole lot of work to do. They still have a whole lot of restructuring and a whole lot of things to fix when they go up against those greater opponents. Luminosity's just been stomping over everybody, including Cloud9, when they faced them off earlier at the end of the group stage. Tempo Storm as well. A little bit of a rough patch there against C9, but for the most part, still managed to keep their composure and rounded back very nicely to close things out there. These Brazilian teams, way better structured, way better at dealing with pressure, whereas teams like CLG, as soon as they come under pressure, and a lot of the other North American teams too, as soon as they come under a large amount of pressure, they just instantly start to crumble. That's something that's existed for the longest time with CLG and happens with a lot of these other NA rosters, and is going to continue to happen until something is fixed with that. And I don't even know, it's definitely not like an inherent thing that is calculable and these guys can fix overnight. It's definitely an attitude issue among most of North American players that needs to be looked at in the long term and fixed by a coach or someone such as that.
Would you say that any specific teams or even players, if you want to get really specific, have kind of come out on top from this event and look good heading into the future, heading into those major qualifiers, for example?
Cloud9 is definitely surprised with how well they were able to perform here. Even from an individual basis, Slemmy, for his first big event, was doing a fantastic job in quite a few maps while still taking on the IGL role. And not even this, but Stewie, this is easily the biggest event, not even just in single sets, but this is the biggest event he's had in a while. He's really come into his own, taking on the role of the secondary opper. After Freakazoid leaves the roster, he used to do that, and now that Stewie is picking that up, he was absolutely crazy on it, especially on the CT side. We saw it back on Inferno there. He was dominating the car angle, and yesterday versus CLG when they played on Cash, he just absolutely controlled the entire A bomb site there, playing both aggressively in A main and back over inside of the quad area too. He was just an unstoppable force.
Okay, well, for the last question, I can throw you under the bus a little bit. I can
Okay.
try and give you a bit of pressure. For all the NA fans out there, they're looking to you for guidance right now. They're going to be facing some European competition soon, hopefully. Do you see any hope for NA going forward? Liquid did a really good run at the last major. Can you see them repeating it, or any other teams coming in and giving Europe, or even Brazil now, a real challenge?
I think versus maybe some of the lower tier European teams, like the tier 2 teams such as Dignitas and whatnot, we still may be able to have an edge over them. But when it comes to the Titans of Europe, right now I still think we're way too far out of shape to be consistently beating them. Maybe a room for an upset or two, but I don't think we'll be having any North American teams within the top like 5 anytime soon, unfortunately.